Hello there! Well, today we'll be painting these beautiful native flowers with Montmartre Ultra Soft watercolour pencils. But before we start, if you love art, then you'll have to check out the other lessons at our website at www.montmartre.net because we have hundreds more there, as well as links to our Facebook, Instagram and to our art club, The Creative Connection. Colour guide and outline can be found in the PDF and can be downloaded and printed out from our website. First, start by shading the back side of the outline sheet with a 6B pencil. Flip it over and place it onto the back side of a page of watercolour paper. Tape it into position and retrace it with a 2H pencil. Ensure the pencil has an acute tip and don't press too hard as you can damage the paper. Carefully remove the sheet and we can add some colour. First colour step is to lay in the background. For this I use black, grey and royal blue and create 3 swatches onto a canvas panel and activate the swatch with a traditional mop brush. Some people use paper as the swatch surface, but I find the paper gets waterlogged. Pills and little bits of paper can transfer from the swatch onto the project. I'll work up from the bottom and add more water as I move up the page, thereby lightening the coat. Creating a swatch is a good way to get a smooth layer. The other ways to use watercolour pencils are to add the pencils first, then add water, and the third is to dampen the paper first and then add the watercolour pencil. This provides an intense mark like that made by an oil pastel. To lay in the fern leaves, I create a swatch consisting of sap green, light green and yellow ochre. I activate it again with the number 4 brush mop and lay it in. I use a fair amount of water and don't overly mix it, so there is some variation in the leaves. When using lots of water in a wash, if colours are to overlap, don't bring them together or the colours will flow and meld. Instead, bring the colours very close together. Let them partially dry, then bring the colours together and apply the mix wet. These ferns are in the background, so they need to be fairly subtle. Mop brushes are fantastic as they hold so much liquid. As soon as the tip makes contact with the paper, the colour floods out and you have to try and coax it into the correct area. So while you're governing where the colour goes, you're not in total control of it. That's why those happy mistakes happen and why watercolour is exciting. A wet mix also allows you to drop colour into the wash to create even more interest. The thing I like about laying down washes is that you don't know how it will turn out. You can also dab out the colour with a paper towel. Paper towels are a necessity to always have close at hand. If paint drips off your brush, you have a window of about 3 seconds to mop it up before it stains. Watercolour pencils were my gateway medium as I got a set for my 10th birthday and used them until they were so short I could no longer hold on to them. Now we move on to the rest of the leaves of the Protea and Watercolour. This green is created from cadmium yellow, sap green and yellow ochre. I use more of the sap green in the swatch and apply it the same way. One of the challenges of painting flowers is the large amount of differing greens in any bouquet. Even though they might be one particular hue, there is many subtle nuances across the leaves. If there is another species, the green is obviously different, and a green cannot, in most cases, be realistically created from a single pigment. The leaves of the Protea and the Watercolour have a rich olive hue, and I'll be adding a wash over this layer in the next step. The Protea and Watercolour both belong to the Protocaea family. Proteas and Watercolours shared common ancestors back in Gondwana, when Australia and South Africa were joined as part of the supercontinent in the south, some 200 million years ago. The third and final green is created from sap green and rose madder. Adding red to green is the best way to darken a green and still keep it clean. I apply this with a medium water brush. Water brushes allow you to apply colour with a little bit more precision and have the added advantage that colours can be instantaneously diluted and lightened. They are also obviously ideal to use on site. One really great trick is to create a heap of swatches on the heavy card with watercolour pencils and use that as a sort of palette that can be activated with a water brush when you get to the spot. I make sure this tone is dark, but again not so dark that the underlying tone is masked. If an area needs to be darker, I add more red to the colour. Try to abide by the age-old adage that one works from light to dark with watercolours. And remember, if a colour is made too dark, just pat the colour with a dry towel. It is also good practice to keep a test sheet next to the project so you can test the colour before you commit to the painting. Create a darker tone behind the flowers to suggest depth, and try to get texture into that coat by allowing light areas show through in places. Add shadow beneath the flower also. For the Watercolour, I create a swatch of cadmium red and lay in a very wet wash over the entire flower with that mop again. The mop is my personal favourite brush for watercolours. It has an amazing water holding capability, and if it is squeezed out dry, it acts like a sponge and is brilliant at lifting out colour. I add a little more pigment into the bottom side of the flower to suggest a rough shape. I then add colour into the two proteas as well. As red and green are complementary colours, the flowers pop as soon as the colour is laid in. These two will be a different hue of red, but created by glazing a wash over the first red. Now I can start detailing the flowers. The first step is to apply some purple directly onto the anthers of the Watercolour. Watercolour pencils contain quite a lot of pigment, so to provide a subtle tone, it is best to only apply a light covering. You can always add more colour if you feel the colour is not strong enough. I then use a fine watercolour brush to activate the pigment. The colour really only lies on the top of the flower. I then lay some rose madder into the shadow areas between each anther. Sharpen the tip for fine work. Ultra soft watercolour pencils are, as the name suggests, quite soft, so it's best to use a hobby knife to sharpen them. Take more colour into the petals that lie around the base of the flower. These are called the sepals. They have subtle shades of blue and green in them as well. Again, I'm not too heavy-handed with the colour application, as I want some of that underlying tone to be visible. I then activate the red with the fine water brush again. A light wash of cadmium yellow over the rose madder. Let it dry and add colour directly with the cadmium red. Cadmium red has more warmth and more of a yellow tinge. I apply the pigment a little more heavily toward the tip so that when I add water, the red will blend into the underlying colour. Remember to keep the tip as sharp as you can. I then add water to the pigment and activate it, thinning it out in the appropriate positions. These parts of the protea are not petals and are referred to as bracts. They are very tough and woody. They are also quite thick, so bear this in mind when it comes to the rendering of colour, so the right shape is suggested. After you finish an element, give the water brush a squeeze, and wipe the excess colour onto a paper towel. Squeeze the brush to dampen the tip and work on the next one. Once all the bracts are rendered, I detail in between each one with a watery mix of light green with a touch of burnt umber. I then add a thin line of white around each bract and then lay in a light black line under each one. This will suggest the shadow from the light above. Once all of the shadow areas are in, I create a watery wash of cadmium red and lay it in over the head of the flower. I again use the medium water brush and fade it out slightly as I move down the flower. Whilst this is still wet, I take a sharp rose madder pencil and draw in some lines emitting from the tip inside of the flower. This will suggest the fibrous nature of the flower's centre. You need a fine tip to do this. I then dip the brush into some burnt umber and create more fibres a little darker. I lay more colour into the top of the flower head where the fibres all meet at the tip and try to create a little texture. Thanks for watching. You can share your creative projects on social media using #MontmartreArt. We look forward to your creations and we'll see you next time.